Well, good morning. There's like twice as many of you in here now, so I'll say it again. It's been a while since I've seen you. Thank you to Jordan, who's all three of y'all are in here. Jordan, thank you for preaching for us. Chris, thank you for preaching for us. And Todd, thank you for preaching for us. I valued some time away. I also valued y'all being able to hear from different people besides me. But in the three Sundays that I've been away from you, we've had a hurricane, an assassination attempt, a president who has said he's not going to rerun for election, and it seems as if the world that we know it is falling apart at the seams. But we're used to this by now. We began this process somewhere around 2016, and we've all gone through this madness together where it seems like every month brings us a new unprecedented moment. But this isn't even to mention the individual realities that many of you in this room are carrying. Many of you are carrying the disillusionment, the disappointment of setbacks in your career. Disillusionment and the disappointment of a marriage that is falling apart, or maybe not what you bargained for. Many of you that are dealing with the disillusionment and disappointment of ongoing singleness and loneliness that you thought, God, do you not hear my prayers? I'm so alone. I just want a partner. Many of you that are dealing with the disillusionment and the disappointment of health diagnoses that seem to have no real good positive outcome. So the question I want to pose for us this morning in my ever optimistic and cheerful and sunny and bright way is, what if we lose? What if we actually really lose? What if it doesn't all work out? What if your party loses the upcoming election? God forbid. What if this policy or that policy is done or is undone? What if our country falls apart and our nation collapses, which is like kind of a joke, but also, I don't know, we'll see where the next several months take us. But maybe more importantly, what if the treatment doesn't work? What if your marriage doesn't actually get fixed or get better? What if you never do get to meet your life partner and you're resigned to a life of singleness, loneliness? What if you end up stuck in that dead-end job and your career feels like a failure? What happens if everything actually really falls apart? What does it mean when the things that you thought could never possibly happen actually happen? This is the story of Habakkuk. And honestly, maybe I'm projecting onto y'all, but I find myself very much in this story today. In a place of feeling like, man, I was texting someone this week, I could just use a break. And not like a break as in like rest, as like a break as in like some good fortune, like things, instead of things going bad and then bad and then bad, like just I don't know, like, oh no, I got a $5 winning lottery ticket or whatever. I don't play the lottery, don't worry, you don't have to pray for me or remove your pastor because I gamble. Maybe like you, maybe you like Habakkuk find yourself this morning lamenting. Maybe the opening few verses that were read this morning need to just simply wash over your soul, and I would invite you to revisit them this week if you feel like that's needed. God, where are you? Maybe you find yourself asking God how long he will allow for injustice and violence to run rampant. Maybe you, like Habakkuk, are crying out, going, God, are you not going to do something about this? I actually thought you cared. Habakkuk presents this lament to God, and Habakkuk does not like God's response. So the story of Habakkuk, right? So last week we were in Nahum, and Nahum is like, hey, yeah, the Assyrians that came and destroyed northern Israel, they've got theirs coming, right? That's the message of Nahum. The message of Habakkuk is like, oh yeah, and the Babylonians who are going to come in and take out the rest of what remains of Israel, the southern tribes of Judah, don't worry, they've got theirs coming as well. And it's really easy for us to mistake the message of Habakkuk to be a message of God's judgment, but that's not actually the message of Habakkuk, because nestled in Habakkuk is this whole other story, this whole other narrative. And so God responds to Habakkuk's, hey God, what the heck, with, oh, don't worry, Habakkuk, I see it, and I'm raising up for you the Babylonians, this vicious and violent people. They'll come in and they'll take care of all the injustice. And Habakkuk's like, whoa, hold on a second. That doesn't sound like a solution to me. They're worse than us, is basically his response. God's going to send the Babylonians in to overthrow Judah, destroy Jerusalem, and to destroy God's holy temple, which for us might feel like empty, meaningless religious symbolism. But in their theology, in their world, this was the very presence of God. This was the very place where heaven met earth, and God was actually going to raise up these people that would come in and destroy it, making God's people, God's nation, a distant memory. And so Habakkuk, like we would all do, says, wait, you can't do that. They're worse than us. And wait, aren't you God? Don't you hate injustice? Don't you hate violence? Don't you hate evil? I'm going to go over here, stand on the wall of Jerusalem and watch and wait and see if the Babylonians are actually going to come. And so he goes up onto the wall and he waits. And Habakkuk waits to see how God will respond. And the book hinges here, the beginning of chapter 2. So Habakkuk prays, God responds. Habakkuk prays again, is like, I don't like that. That's not good enough. God responds again. And the beginning of his response has two important points. The first is he says, Habakkuk, I want you to go ahead and get a pen and paper and write this down. Now, for us, that feels like a meaningless detail, but in a world where there are not pens and papers readily available, and it took a great amount of time and energy and money to actually go and get something to write on and to write with, what God is saying to Habakkuk is, hey, my friend, you can go ahead and set this one down in stone. This will happen. Amen, Ollie. If you haven't met him yet, that is my gorgeous and beautiful son, Oliver, who apparently is a louder preacher than me most of the time. So the second thing that God will tell Habakkuk, that God will tell Habakkuk is, hey, write this down, and then before I tell you what I'm about to tell you, I want to make this really, really, really clear. And if you've got your Bibles, I want you to open up to Habakkuk chapter 2. If you want to pull open an app, you can do that. We'll also put it on the screen behind you. We're going to spend just a second in one verse, and then we're going to move on to the end of the book, which you heard read for us this morning. But the point of verses 1 through 3 is, hey, write this down. This is going to happen. This is happening, Habakkuk. Babylon will come in and they will overthrow Judah. And Babylon will actually experience God's justice towards their violence and greed. But then in verse 4, God tells Habakkuk this. Look, as for the impudent one, his soul is not right within him. But the righteous one will live by his faith. Now, if you are a professional Christian, like I am, thank you. This phrase, the righteous shall live by faith, is probably familiar to you. You've heard this somewhere before. This is the phrase that Paul pulls out and puts in the middle of Romans when he's talking about like salvation itself. And some weird stuff is happening with this. I want to make you all very uncomfortable for just a second. First, the weird thing is this. The first half of this verse, we don't really know what it means, which is great. I love this. The Bible very clearly says this. Well, except in this one part where we're like, we think it maybe kind of says something like this. So the verse part of 4, behold, as for the impudent one, his soul is not right within him. There's like some obscurity around exactly what in the world this is saying. Secondly, the second part of this, there's some strange stuff going on as well. The righteous one will live by his faith. And the strange stuff centers on this word faith. So the Hebrew word that's actually used here is better translated as like faithfulness. So the righteous person, the just person, the person who's living a straight path, a narrow path, the human sort of path that I want humans to live, is going to be living a faithful life, is what God tells Habakkuk. Now, here's what's weird about that. So we have this, right? If you're like not into this Bible nerd trivia stuff, feel free to tune out for a few seconds. I'll wake you back up when it's time to tune back in. But here's some oddities of what's going on here. So we have what's called the Masoretic text, which is the Hebrew Bible. The Hebrew Bible dates to like the 13th, 14th century. Like that's like where we have like we can get our hands on tangible manuscripts of this text. Right, so this is what makes the scrolls that were found in Qumran really important, is because they date to like 300 BC, and we can match those scrolls to these 14th century documents that we have from these Masoretic texts. Right, you sort of with me so far? Cool. So before all of that, dating to like the 7th century, 6th century BC, we have what's called the Septuagint. So the Septuagint is the Greek translation of the Hebrew text. So the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, like historical like manuscripts that we can get our hands on, is actually older than the scripts that we can get our hands on in Hebrew. Tracking? Okay. So the Septuagint, the Greek version of the Hebrew Bible, says this in Habakkuk 2:4. But the righteous one will live by the faithfulness of God. In other words, there's some ambiguity about his in Hebrew that the translators in whatever the 6th century BC are translating or interpreting as the faithfulness. It does not belong to us. It is not our faithfulness to God, but rather God's faithfulness to us that sustains our life. And it's this idea that I firmly believe Paul is picking up and running with in Romans. And it's this idea that I think Paul is going to point to as the faithfulness, the thing that is worth putting our allegiance in Jesus Christ. And so this is happening. And for those of us who are left in the midst of all of this chaos happening, what are we supposed to do? Let me put it in 2024 pastor language. Cast your cares on the Lord. Throw yourself on the mercy of God. Entrust your life to the one who sustains all life. And this is exactly what Habakkuk does. So God goes on to explain, I'm going to repay the Babylonians for their violence, for their evil. It's this karmic repayment. So the Babylonians are violent towards people. People are going to be violent towards them. The Babylonians are stealing from people. People are going to steal from them. And then Habakkuk offers one final response in chapter 3. And we're going to go down to the very end. So if you've got your Bibles and you're with us, turn to verse 16. So in verses 1 through 15, Habakkuk has been just going through this. He's written this song. It's this beautiful poetry that goes back and just says, our God has fought for us before. In all of these ways, he has delivered us here. He's delivered us here. He's delivered us here. And then you get to verse 16. I heard, and my soul trembled. I heard what God has said, and my soul trembled. At the sound, my lips quivered. Death entered into my bones. And in my place, I tremble. So Hebrew there is literally, in my grave, I fear, I tremble. Because I must wait quietly for the day of distress. for the people to arise who will attack us. So Habakkuk seems to clearly be saying, oh, I'm going to die here. I've cried out to you, you've answered me, and the answer is, this ends for me here. And yet, Habakkuk goes on. Even if the fig tree does not blossom and there's no fruit on the vines, even if the yield of the olive fails and the fields produce no food, even if the flock disappears from the fold and there are no cattle in the stalls. Anyone seen Mighty Ducks 2? You know, the cowboy hockey guy in Mighty Ducks 2, and they're all like at this rah-rah thing. He says something really similar to this that I can never get out of my head. That's for free. You can write that down or not, but these are all signs of God's presence, God's blessing. It's the flourishing, right? So there is no fig on the vine. There is no fruit on the tree. There's no progeny. Like, this is death. This is decay. This is destruction. This is undoing. Even if all around me is darkness and death and chaos, even if I'm standing in my own grave, I will triumph in the Lord. I will rejoice in the God who delivers me, in the God of my salvation. I want to take a moment and do something I had planned for later in the sermon because it feels appropriate right now. I want you to fast forward to the New Testament. I want you to be a disciple for Jesus Christ for just a moment. You've just seen your Messiah, your King, your Lord murdered. It's Saturday morning. There's chaos. There's darkness. There's death. Or maybe you could do this with me. Go to Jesus himself. On a Saturday morning, 2,000 some odd years ago, whose body lays decaying in a tomb. There is no blessing. There is no flourishing. There is death. There is chaos. And yet I will triumph in the Lord. I will rejoice in the God of my salvation. There's something that I think Habakkuk understands. There's something that Jesus understood. There's something that we, as followers of Jesus, grasp at and try to wrap our heads around, try to wrap our hearts around, but we continually fail at actually doing. And it's simply this: God triumphs over death. That even if the worst thing happens to you, God is a God of resurrection, of renewal, of redemption. And so the Lord God is my strength, Habakkuk says. And he's made my feet like deer's feet, and he has me walk on my high places. Habakkuk understood his hope was in the God who is faithful. So as the Babylonian hordes are advancing towards Judah, the prophet sings a song of God's sovereignty and victory, confessing that even in the face of his utter destruction and his people's utter destruction, all will actually be well. This is some toxic positivity, y'all. It's fine. It's going to be fine. This is fine. But Habakkuk's saying, no, it's actually not going to be fine, but it will be fine. He fully entrusts himself to God, even in his death, even in the destruction of his people. Habakkuk was okay with losing. Habakkuk and his family likely died at the hands of these unrighteous Babylonians, these so-called pagans, as the Israelites would have called them and thought of them. And this would have either happened in the invasion and destruction of Jerusalem, where they would have met a quick and violent end, or it would have happened as refugees who fled to Egypt, slowly and painfully away from their home and their culture and everything that they've ever known and loved, or it would have happened as captives in the nation of Babylon. But it happened. They died at the hands of the Babylonians. Habakkuk understood God's vision and realized that Habakkuk's story was coming to a close. And in many ways, Israel's story was coming to a close. He realized, though, that the God of his salvation story was not. That God's story was not done. But more than that, he understood that the God of his salvation has promised to bring his life from the pit, to quote so many of the Psalms, to deliver him from the hands of the ones who would take his life, to raise Habakkuk from the dead. This is Paul's argument in Romans, except he does it with Abraham. I think it's really tempting and easy for us as American Christians in 2024, right? Pick a flavor of Christianity. It really doesn't matter. This is not a Christian problem. This is a human problem. We really, really, really want to worship a crossless Christ. What I mean by that is it's tempting to understand that our deliverance and victory in Christ is a deliverance and victory from real, actual injustices, real, actual violence, real, actual suffering of this world here and now. And very quickly, we can easily buy a theology called the prosperity gospel that says if you just believe in Jesus, then good things will happen to you. And that if good things aren't happening to you, well, you just must not be believing hard enough or right enough. And you need to find some stuff in you, get yourself up and do it better this time. We see this in a number of different ways, right? This is Christian nationalism. If we could just be moral enough, I know we'll make a bunch of Christian laws so everyone has to be moral enough. Then God will really love us. But we see it in lots of other ways too. The problem with this is Jesus asks us to come and follow him. And that pattern of life doesn't fit the pattern of Jesus' life. Jesus makes it clear in all four Gospels, you want to follow me, here's where we're going. We're going to crucifixion. You want to follow me, here's what you can expect. You can expect it to actually be worse for a little while before it gets better. Samuel Wells is a Christian ethicist. He's the vicar of some highfalutin church in London. I don't know, sounds important. King's Cross or something like that. I don't know. But he builds on N.T. Wright's idea of how we ought to engage with the Bible, or probably better put, and let the Bible engage with us. And he invites us into imagining the Bible as a 5-act play. So rather than reading the Bible as basic instructions before leaving earth, right? I don't know, I'm going to take this verse and apply it to my life. Jesus said, go and get a donkey. I guess I got to go get a donkey. Please don't read the Bible that way. But rather, what he asks us to do or invites us into, and it's a metaphor, right? He understands this isn't actually how the Bible works, but he's saying, imagine if the Bible were a 5-act play. The 4th act, he's going to say, is the act that we find ourselves in. And yet the problem is the script has been lost, or at least most of the script has been lost. And we're in the middle of the part of the play where we don't actually have the script. And so we have to figure out, how do we play out our parts in this moment based on the previous movements of the play and based on what we know about the end of the play. And so he goes on to say this. It's a play that begins with a Trinitarian God who has far too much love within himself to not share it. And I just love that picture of God. And so God creates creatures in order to share the love, to love and be loved. And he gives these creatures the freedom to choose. But they use their freedom for ill, and though continually loved by God, they return so little of that love back to him or to the rest of the world. This is Act 1. So in Act 2, God moves towards this creation to redeem it, and he chooses a people, and he chooses this people to be a light to the nations, a picture, an image of who he is to the rest of the world. And these are wrestlers with God. Israel. And they will grapple with God throughout the Old Testament, which is a love story where Israel is being wooed by the God who loves them, who is not quite really sure if they want to be in this relationship or not. And so finally, we get to the definitive act of the play, Act 3. And here, the author of the play, God himself, enters into the play in the person of Jesus Christ. And it's here that we see most clearly this Trinitarian God of love, where God most clearly and precisely and in an embodied way makes himself known. And in this act, we see God overcome death and sin. And we leave Act 3 with this question: if God overcomes death, what will God not overcome? And we enter into Act 4, which is where we find ourselves, the church. Now, Act 4 is partially written in the New Testament, but most of it is unwritten. Most of it is what Sam Wells will call improv, where we, if we're good actors, faithful actors, will take the first 3 acts and the final acts, and we will piece together how should we live in the here and now. Well makes the point that in this metaphor, the church is a troupe of actors setting out to imagine how the 4th act should continue in light of the first 3 and the final one, where in the end, God will make all things new. So here's why we do all of that. I think one of the problems with American Christianity, and it's so American of us, I love it, we make this a one-act play that's all about us. For Wells, the plight of anyone who has not yet become a participant in God's community, the church, is precisely this. They don't understand that they're in a 5-act play. They think this is the only act. And so here's what that actually will do to us. In a 1-act play, all meaning has to be established in that act. So this means this life is all you get. You want to end injustice? You better do it now. Time's running out. You want to defeat poverty? You better go do it. Time is running out. You want to end your loneliness? You better go get married. Time is running out. You want to be successful? You better, I don't know, what are they telling you to do? Sleep 2 hours a night and drink coffee at certain times, and you better biohack your way into figuring it out. You are not allowed to fail in a 1-act play. You're not allowed to be human in a 1-act play. All of your hopes and all of your dreams and all of your aspirations have to be fulfilled here and now, or else. So that means everything you have left in you has to be spent here and now. And we wonder why we're so busy, why we're so anxious, why we're so concerned about doing more, being more. Wells says it this way: we have this sense that's thrown on our shoulders that all of it has to be squeezed into this unforgiving span of a single life. But the Christian drama, the one that I believe we find ourselves in, we play a part. Absolutely. We are not main characters. You can leave the main character energy. But it leaves us room for disappointment. It leaves us room for yearning for more. We don't have to be okay with whatever is. It also leaves us room to fail, to be human, to get tired, to not actually have enough left in us. And most certainly, it means that you can free yourself from the weight of having to save the world, which so many of us millennials still carry on our shoulders. But beyond that, it also frees you from the weight of having to save yourself, which I also feel like so many of us millennials have carried with us for so long. Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy burdened, and I'll give you rest." You have rest this morning. The just shall live by faith. In our faithfulness, you're not allowed to fail. In our faithfulness, the world is not allowed to fall apart. It's your fault. But in God's faithfulness, there's space to be you, to fail, to not be enough, to be yourself. Our God is able to endure being unjustly murdered. Our God is able to join us in the depths of the grave itself. Because our God knows that even death, even sin, even the darkest corners of the human heart are not dark enough that he can't overcome them. And so Wells depicts this drama of the final act as one, he says, beware of anyone that tells you exactly how the final act is going to go. And if you know, you know. There's like websites attached to this, and there's a whole book deals. But I like how Wells describes the end of all things. He says, the drama of how God transforms, he says, this is the drama of how God will transform the poverty of nature by the riches of grace, and will turn falseness and striving and pain into communion and gladness and joy. By no other power but the power of the cross. This is the play. This is the story. This is the drama that we find ourselves in. This means that Christianity will not save the cosmos. Doesn't matter what version of it, Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox, progressive, conservative, fundamentalism, liberalism, doesn't matter. Christianity will not save the cosmos. But the Christ of Christianity most certainly will. And so what if we lose? If we lose, then we find ourselves losing with a God who loses with us. A God who also chooses to take us with him in resurrection. A God who chooses to love us in our losing, in our failure, forever and ever and ever. A God who joins us in the tomb and breathes life back into us. Our hope is that Christ will one day finally make all things new. And if you're wrestling with whether that's true or not this morning, you're in good company. But whether we wrestle with that, whether we believe it's true or not, I don't think changes the reality. God is going to make all things new. And so our work is to gather Sunday after Sunday and orient ourselves around this reality. Because we doubt it, we forget it, we need to hear it week in and week out. We need to be embraced by the God of love week in and week out, so that we can go and embody this hope to a weary world.